What if the world is looking at things all wrong? What if everything we've been told about global power, innovation, and the future of civilization is upside down? Could it be, brace yourself, that China, yes, China, is actually doing something right? Maybe even better than the United States? Now that the initial gasp has cleared the air, let's dive into why one sharp, seasoned professor sat down and laid it out. Plain, blunt, and backed with a mix of logic, data, and a touch of brutal sarcasm. According to him, we're all so caught up in ideological fluff and fear-mongering that we're missing a much larger reality. China might not just be winning, it might be deserving to. Let that settle in. The future is coming, and by the looks of it, some of us are bringing rocks to a rocket launch. Let's begin with the blunt forecast. By 2050, we're staring at a planet with 10 billion people. And no, they're not all flocking to Silicon Valley or Times Square. Most of the population surge will happen in Africa and parts of Asia, places where dreams outrun resources and systems are often held together with chewing gum and good intentions. Meanwhile, two nations will dominate the wealth charts like greedy kids hoarding all the Halloween candy: the United States and China. Now here's where it gets spicy. With these two giants clutching over half the planet's wealth, the rest of the world is looking more like a guest at a luxury buffet, except they're holding empty plates. The question the professor throws like a dart: in this kind of dangerously unequal world, does it make any sense that the two richest countries should spend their time fighting each other? Imagine two doctors arguing over a patent while the patient dies on the floor. Welcome to Geopolitics, 2050 edition. Let's decode the implications. More inequality means more of everything bad: migration chaos, diseases spreading faster than memes, and terrorism waiting like a ticking bomb. Climate change? Don't even start. Yet the two titans, America and China, are behaving like bickering siblings with nuclear weapons and trade agreements instead of toys. According to the professor, the solution isn't to pick a winner. The solution is to recognize that both need to stop acting like global toddlers and realize they're steering the entire planet toward a cliff. Not tomorrow, not next decade, but soon. Now, here's the twist you didn't see coming. When the West decided to slap sanctions on Russia, they expected global applause. But the echo chamber of Western media forgot something important. Most of the world doesn't read English news, and even when they do, they don't agree. Out of 175 countries, only 5 supported the sanctions on Russia. That's right, 5. That's fewer supporters than a failed indie band. Africa? Nope. Latin America? Not interested. Middle East? Hard pass. Asia? A tiny fraction. The West isn't the globe anymore. It's just the loudest table at the party. So when China steps up and offers infrastructure, trade, and what they call modernization, many of these countries aren't thinking ideology. They're thinking roads, ports, electricity. And while America writes tweets, China builds bridges. Now here's where the professor really cranks up the volume. The Chinese aren't pretending to be America light. Their version of modernization isn't about installing Starbucks on every corner or making everyone binge superhero movies. It's about finding a model that works for them, and increasingly for other countries too. They're making it very clear, modernization does not mean westernization. In fact, it might mean exactly the opposite. The Chinese government is pushing a narrative that's not just about economic growth, but includes ideas like harmony with nature, common prosperity, and, get this, a peaceful world. Sound idealistic? Maybe, but guess who's actually showing up to the construction sites in Kenya, Brazil, or Laos with blueprints and bulldozers? Not Washington. Grand ideas are easy. America has no shortage of slogans, but slogans don't pour concrete or run fiber optics through villages. The professor points out that China has been obsessively focused on execution. They don't just announce 5-year plans, they follow them. For years, Chinese leaders invited the best minds from across the world to Beijing: economists, engineers, Nobel laureates. They didn't need fanfare, they needed results. They asked the right questions, tailored the answers, and built a system that turned a poor country into a global manufacturing beast in 3 decades. That's not magic, that's method. Meanwhile, in the US, Politicians can't even agree on fixing potholes or paying teachers. Say Communist Party to an American, and their brain probably flashes red flags, grey suits, and totalitarian nightmares. But what the professor explains is far more complex, and possibly more flattering, than Americans want to admit. In practice, China's ruling party operates like a brutal meritocracy. You don't join the upper ranks unless you're extremely competent. These aren't shady oligarchs, they're exam-crushing elites trained in governance, engineering, economics, and yes, ideology. The system resembles an ancient imperial model, a ruling class chosen by ability, not inheritance. Sound familiar? It should. It's how America claims to operate. Except in China, the ladder is taller, the competition stiffer, and the bar higher. If there's one comparison that sends Americans into spasms, it's this. The Chinese Communist Party, the prof says, is structurally similar to the US military. Both are rigid hierarchies, both demand performance, both operate on loyalty, discipline, and networks built over decades. If two 18-year-olds join the PLA or the military academy, rise through ranks and meet 30 years later as top brass, they know each other. They've earned it. There's no guesswork. And if they mess up, they're out. Meanwhile, Western democracy elects reality show hosts and treats policy like Instagram content. The Chinese system may lack freedom of speech, but at least the people in charge actually read. The professor shared a story that should make every bureaucrat in Washington squirm. In 2013, China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. The US had a chance, a real chance, to collaborate. They were invited, welcomed. And what happened? Nothing. Bureaucrats buried the offer before it even reached the president's desk, not because it was unworkable, because it didn't fit the narrative. And so, China went alone, built alliances, paved highways, and connected continents, while the West argued over pronouns. American imagination is stuck in a Cold War reboot. It still believes it's in a wrestling match with a red giant. But the professor urges people to wake up. China isn't trying to replace the US as a world emperor. They're trying to escape that whole model entirely. This isn't the Chinese century. It's the post-West century, one where no single civilization owns the map, the rules, or the right to define modernity. The Chinese plan in decades, Americans plan in fiscal quarters. That alone should tell you who's playing the long game. While America obsesses over culture wars, China obsesses over supply chains. While American companies argue about who gets the corner office, Chinese companies are busy swallowing half the rare earth market. And while American politicians stage walkouts, Chinese ministers fly to Africa with contracts and cranes. You can't blame countries like Brazil, Nigeria, or Indonesia for leaning toward China. When roads are broken, people don't care about political systems. They care about who shows up with asphalt. And right now, it's China. The professor's final message is harsh but clear. If America doesn't recalibrate soon, it won't be remembered as a fallen empire. It'll be remembered as the empire that chose to fall while scrolling on its phone. So let's just be honest about something for a moment. When people in the West hear China is better than the US, it's like telling an American that their favorite fast food chain is secretly owned by Brussels. Instant offense. Blood pressure rising. How dare you, they shout while clutching their cheeseburgers and red, white, and blue plastic flags. But let's cool the patriotic jets for a second and entertain the blasphemy. What if? Just what if the professor is right? Because while the US spends its time arguing about pronouns, banning books, and turning school board meetings into UFC matches, China is building infrastructure at a speed that makes the Roman Empire look like it used wheelbarrows powered by goats. Want a new high-speed rail line in the US? Great, you'll get it in 2047. After 97 environmental reviews, a $1 million study about endangered weeds, and a public debate about which bird might be offended. Meanwhile, in China, someone points to a map, says, "We want a train here," and bam, a month later it's zipping by at 350 km/h. You can sip tea in Shanghai and still make it to lunch in Beijing without breaking a sweat. That's not just efficiency, that's sorcery by American standards. But oh, it gets better. The Chinese education system, as rigid and competitive as it may be, is producing an army of engineers, scientists, and tech nerds faster than Silicon Valley can say IPO. In the US, meanwhile, we're asking third graders how they feel about math, and if they don't like it, we switch to interpretive dance to teach algebra. The result? China is designing AI systems that can compose symphonies and pilot spacecraft, while American students are posting TikToks about how mitochondria just isn't vibing with their aura today. And don't even get started on discipline. In China, if you mess up in government or business, you disappear faster than a magician's rabbit. Accountability may be terrifying, but it sure gets results. In the US, you can bankrupt a company, crash the economy, and still walk away with a golden parachute and a guest spot on late-night TV. It's capitalism's version of failing upward, and it's practically a sport. But perhaps the biggest flex of all, the way China plays the long game. America is run on election cycles, 2 years, 4 years. Everything must be short-term, poll-tested, and photo-op ready. In China, they're planning for 2100, while the US is still trying to pass a budget that was due 3 years ago. The Chinese leadership doesn't need to win over angry Facebook uncles every few years. They just get stuff done. There's no Senate filibuster to stall a solar panel initiative because some senator from Corn County got offended by a panda. And yes, let's talk about pandas. Even the soft power game is different. China sends pandas to countries like it's handing out friendship bracelets. The US sends military bases. One says, hug me, the other says, obey me. Who do you think the world prefers showing up at the party? And don't get it twisted, China isn't perfect. Surveillance is heavy, speech isn't free. The system has its dark sides. But while Americans are busy suing each other over coffee temperatures, the Chinese are creating entire smart cities that put Tony Stark's lab to shame. Now let's not forget the environment. Americans drive trucks that need their own zip code. In China, they're building solar farms the size of Belgium and inventing electric cars that cost less than your phone. Sure, their pollution record used to be a nightmare, but guess what? They realized it, panicked, and now they're leading in green tech while the US debates whether climate change is just a phase. Even in tech, China is sprinting. Ever heard of WeChat? It's basically if PayPal, Facebook, Uber, Amazon, WhatsApp, and Tinder all had a baby and it was raised by a communist grandmother. Meanwhile, in America, we still have separate apps for everything. None of them talk to each other, and half of them crash when you need them most. Convenience is a birthright in China. In the US, it's a riddle wrapped in bureaucracy. And culturally, the West paints China as this monolithic robot nation where nobody smiles and everyone eats rice with a side of propaganda. But take a trip there and you'll find bustling art scenes, street fashion that makes New York look like 2004, and a population that knows how to hustle, grind, and more importantly, win. Say what you will, but there's swagger in strategy. And China's got it. Meanwhile, the US is in a civil war over gas stoves. Look, nobody's saying one is a utopia and the other is a disaster, but here's what the professor is trying to say. Maybe, just maybe, the world's center of gravity is shifting. Not because China is louder, not because it's richer, but because it's focused. America is a brilliant idea, still trying to live up to its promise. China is a civilization that's decided it's tired of being the underdog in everyone else's movie. So when the professor says China is better, he isn't praising oppression or ignoring flaws. He's pointing at a global scoreboard that most Americans don't even know exists, where bridges are being built, hospitals rise in weeks, and people are too busy working to argue about Mr. Potato Head. And if you find yourself getting upset by all of this, consider this. Maybe it's not about who's better, maybe it's about who's trying harder. And while America is busy reinventing the definition of the word infrastructure, China is reinventing the world map. It's not about communism versus capitalism, it's not about freedom versus control, it's about execution versus excuses. And right now, the scoreboard doesn't lie. Until then, the professor isn't wrong, he's just early. If you're still here and your mind hasn't exploded yet, smash that like button, subscribe for more truth bombs, and drop a comment below. Is the professor right? Or are we just not ready to face the facts? See you in the next one.